no compromise on this. The way the opposition's demand for division of votes was rejected. And as the procedures go, if an opposition MP during voting demands that there should be division of votes, it's the MP's right. Because you want to show whether you are in support of the bill or against the bill or where you stand. That's MP's right, and that has been the parliamentary procedure. But those demands were summarily rejected by the chair. He went for the voice vote. How can you call the passage of a bill, or how can you legitimize the passage of the bill through voice vote when the entire opposition is opposing it? And as a matter of fact, as Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad said yesterday evening, that the ruling side had more than 110 MPs and opposition had just 70 odd MPs, because most of the opposition MPs were absent yesterday. In fact, we did some calculation. Our colleague Fatima did some calculation. Right. If both sides were present with the full strength and going by the parties stand on the floor of the House, it would have been a touch and go situation. Because you had even the BJD who expressed apprehensions, and BJD wanted these bills to be sent to the select committee. You had the TRS opposing it. I'm talking about parties which have been friendly to the government. They were also opposing the bills. Now, as a matter of fact, we have discussed it in our last show. These bills are important, and as per our view, these bills are good. They will go a long way in helping the farmers. But if the opposition parties have certain objections to it, they want some certain changes, let that be discussed in a parliamentary committee. Because parliamentary committee, if I quote Woodrow Wilson, he said about American Congress, of course, that when the Congress is in session, the Congress is on public exhibition. So when you have discussion in the House, you have live telecast, everybody is making a political point. So you are not actually getting into the nuances of every clause of the bill, because most of the time you are making political posturing. So Woodrow Wilson says, when the Congress is in session, it's on public exhibition, and when the Congress is in its committee room, it is at work. So it's during the committee meetings, what these committees do. These committees invite a lot of experts. They take different opinions. Now you have this bipartisan thing in the committee.
So sorry to interrupt. There was some technical glitch. So I'm just repeating the questions once again for the audience. So what we are discussing today is who is to blame for the Rajya Sabha logjam over the farm sector reforms, the government or the opposition. And Mr. D.K. Singh was just explaining what all happened so far and who he thinks is to be blamed.
Yeah, I don't know how much was...
Just if you could recap a little.
All right. So yes. What I was saying, that both sides have to be held responsible. Now, what the opposition MPs did in the House the day before, that was absolutely unacceptable, because as lawmakers, what you do in the House sends out a larger message. Right. Now, you can't be throwing papers at the chair. You can't be trying to uproot the mic from in front of him. I mean, you have to abide by the set parliamentary etiquette, and as you are expected to behave there. There are certain ways you have to conduct yourself in the House. That unruly behavior is absolutely unacceptable, and so they were suspended. Fair enough. Having said that, I am saying that the government is also equally responsible, I would say, because when the bills were tabled for passage, many opposition MPs were demanding division of votes. So let there be voting on those bills, or let there be a voting on their demand for sending those bills to a select committee. Let there be a voting. Instead, what the deputy chairperson of the Rajya Sabha did, he just ignored all their demands. He went for voice vote. Now, passing a bill through voice vote when almost half of the House is demanding a division of votes, that's unfair. As per parliamentary procedure, even one MP demands a division of votes, you have to go for voting. But all these demands were summarily rejected. Now, what the government has been arguing, yesterday Ravi Shankar Prasad said that the government had over 110 MPs, 116, 117, he said.
Right.
And opposition only had 70 plus MPs. Many MPs decided not to attend the House yesterday. But if you, as I was talking about Fatima, how the calculation Fatima had made that if both sides were in full strength in the House that day, probably it could have been a touch and go affair, because many parties which have been supporting the NDA, like Biju Janata Dal
Right.
or Telangana Rashtra Samiti, they have a lot of apprehensions about these bills, and they wanted these bills to be sent to the select committee. And that was when I was trying to explain the importance of this committee, and that was
Right.
where I was coming to what Woodrow Wilson had said, that when you are having a discussion in the House, basically you are trying to make your political points. So you are not really contributing very much into the nuances of the bill.
Right.
So when it goes to a committee, it's a bipartisan forum. When committees call experts, suppose if these bills had gone to a select committee, the committee would have brought all the stakeholders or their representatives. They could have asked them to depose before the committee, put their points across. Committee could have called the representatives of the government, some independent experts, and then taken a holistic view over these bills. And as it happens, when these committees make recommendations, they are not mandatory for the government, but more often than not, many such recommendations are incorporated in the bills. So that has been a tradition, but unfortunately what has been happening since 2014 is we see this tendency of bulldozing bills. Now from 2004 to 9, 71% of the bills were sent to committees. Now from 2009 to 2014, almost 60% of the bills were sent to the committees for examination. But from 2014 to 2019, only 25% of the bills were sent to the committees. And this year actually no bill has been sent to the committee. So it's like the government had decided, the executive has decided, this is what my bill is going to be, and we will use our numbers to bulldoze it through.
No further discussion.
Now it doesn't work in a parliamentary democracy, not like this.
So we're getting a lot of questions. We'll start with Tarush. He's saying, isn't this same as it was during Telangana state will? No difference between Congress and the Bharatiya Janata Party. And Sumit wants to know which party will gain or lose politically because of this whole Rajya Sabha drama.
On the first point, absolutely. Even during the Congress time, we saw it many times actually. Even the Congress tried to bulldoze the bills. But I have just given you the numbers. 71%, 60%. When these bills would be sent to different committees. Now there are different committees in Parliament. You have a parliamentary standing committee for different ministries. So suppose one parliamentary standing committee is looking at the bills,
Right.
purposes, policies of a particular ministry. Then you have, say, a joint parliamentary committee which is formed, which is from both houses. Again, they study the bills. You have select committee, which these people demanded in this case. The select committee has members from that particular house, say from the Rajya Sabha. But when any bill goes to a committee, the politics ends there. Most of the time we see that. Because then the entire focus is on trying to make that bill foolproof, trying to take care of all aspects of those bills. So this has been somehow, this trend has been missing now of late, especially since 2014. But even before that, during the Congress time also, on several occasions we saw the opposition stalling houses, boycotting the proceedings because of the ruling party's insistence on having its way there. That my way or highway attitude that the ruling parties have often displayed. So it happened during the Congress rule also, it's happening now also. Coming to the second point, who will these bills, who will gain or lose? Frankly, I find it a very exciting time because after a long time, you have a government which is ready to face the polls supporting agriculture reforms. So, as Montek Singh Ahluwalia was talking about the reforms during Manmohan Singh days, that reforms through a stealth. I mean, that was a trend earlier. So you do not actually go to the people and say, okay, this is what we are doing. You just push it and then think that, okay, people will benefit from it. But what happens, people don't really credit you for that and you don't get that popular support.
Right.
Now we have seen the Prime Minister coming out in the front and, I mean, batting on the front foot on this issue. And if you go to Bihar polls saying that, okay, these agricultural reforms are necessary and that becomes your major plank, And if you win the election on that plank, that's a major boost for you, for the government. After a long time, here is a government which is going to the polls. Don't forget, in 2015, when the government was pushing this land acquisition law amendment, government actually was pretty insistent then also, and ordinances were brought 3 times for those amendments in the land acquisition law. When the land bill came, the opposition parties actually they came together and started projecting the government as anti-farmer. And then Modi government developed cold feet in 2015 and abandoned that bill. The bill is still there, but for the last 5 years, the government has not pursued. 5 years later, again, the BJP is facing polls in Bihar. But this time, BJP has decided to go the whole hog and make these agricultural reforms one of its major planks, or at least that's what it seems like so far. Well, going by the merits of the bill, the BJP should win the argument. But of course, lots of propaganda happening. We don't know how it will play out. But as it is, it's a very exciting thing to happen. It should have happened long back. Let politicians go to the people and let them decide, or let them say what they think about these reforms.
So Paris wants to know that, there were these talks of opposition party moving the Supreme Court, and he wants to know, can the Supreme Court cancel this bill based on the fact that division didn't happen even after asking for it, and that due procedures, they were not
Supreme
followed?
Court can. I mean, even after Parliament passes some bills, Supreme Court can squash it. I mean, last time you saw that was the NJAC bill for judicial reforms.
Right.
I mean, Supreme Court just came in and finally stalled it completely. Government is not moving ahead with that. So Supreme Court can, of course, intervene.
But do you think the opposition will go ahead with it as far as moving the court?
Right now, my sense is opposition thinks that probably it's getting support from farmers. Although we see these demonstrations, agitations only in Punjab and Haryana, a bit in Karnataka and some isolated cases in Maharashtra, Karnataka, but otherwise outside Punjab and Haryana you don't really see much opposition. But these opposition parties think that probably this is one issue on which they can put the government on the mat, because in 2015 they had done the same thing.
And they succeeded.
In 2015 they had succeeded, but in subsequent elections didn't really work out. I mean, it didn't have any impact on the BJP's fortune as such. So in 2015, even if the government went back on its land bill, the BJP lost in Bihar polls. This time BJP is going ahead with the agricultural reforms. Let's see.
Ashoka wants to know, why has both Shiv Sena, which supported the bill in Lok Sabha, and NCP, which opposed the bill in Lok Sabha, they chose to stage a walkout in Rajya Sabha?
See, there are two parties which have changed, BJD and NCP. Shiv Sena. Shiv Sena was also in support of the bill, but probably it's because of coalition compulsion, I would say. Because in Maharashtra, you cannot have one party supporting the bill and 2 other parties opposing it.
Right.
So they must have worked it out accordingly. For the BJD, again, BJD supported it in the Lok Sabha, and in the Rajya Sabha it started opposing it. We don't know if voting had happened. Probably BJD would have gone with the government, but we don't know. BJP changes its stand. Probably it wants to play safe, because anything related to farmers is quite sensitive.
Another question from Pramod is, can there be a reform, like before the bill comes to the parliament, it should be sent to parliamentary committee, that it becomes mandatory, that this kind of a reform should be introduced?
It will prolong lawmaking if you start sending all bills to parliamentary committees. Because if there are some bills for small changes, now if you send it to a committee and committee sits over it for days and weeks and months, then that gets delayed. So if there is political consensus on a bill,
right,
so let them discuss in the House, make a few amendments and pass it. But if there is a contentious bill especially, I think it must be sent to a parliamentary committee, so that when something becomes a law, it's foolproof, it has been thoroughly examined, and it represents the political consensus too.
And do you think, Tarush wants to know, if any opposition party, when they come to power, they will reverse this farm bill?
No, actually, you know what happens? Initially, you oppose it, and then you come to power, and you think, okay, it's convenient because somebody else had already taken the flak for this. So you won't be held responsible for what is essentially positive. So you will carry on.
And again, another question on Bihar election. You touched upon it, but they're saying that, do you think this is going to have any impact on Bihar election? The fact that PM Modi has already spoken on this.
Look, farmers of Bihar are not protesting. We haven't heard of any protest in Bihar over this issue. So I suppose the resonance in Bihar is probably in favor of these bills. It's just a supposition because we don't know. We don't have any actual ground report coming from there. But if the BJP is able to sell this as a big pro-farmer move, I think it should work for the BJP.
But what do you think would be the strategy for the opposition from now on, as far as this bill is concerned and as far as, the parliament functioning is concerned?
See, opposition's problem is it keeps shifting on every issue. So for a couple of weeks, you see a sustained pressure on, on the situation on the border. What is the government doing? Then suddenly it will shift to what is happening on COVID situation. Then something else. And that helps the government, because if the opposition were to really put pressure on the government, there are many points on which opposition can actually put the government on the mat. Now, let me tell you some example. Yesterday, I did a write-up on this in my politically correct column on why Modi ministers sound like Ashwathama. Now, Ashwathama, I'm talking about Mahabharata, Ashwathama was the son of Guru Dronacharya. Dronacharya was looking invincible in Mahabharata battle. So how Lord Krishna does it? He gets Bhim to kill one elephant named Ashwathama. And then rumor is spread that, Drona's son Ashwathama has been killed. So Drona is not ready to believe it. So he says, okay, I'll believe it only when Yudhishthir says, yes, he has been killed. So Yudhishthir is called, and Yudhishthir tells Drona, Ashwathama hato iti narova kunjarova. Basically saying that Ashwathama has been killed, but I don't know whether it's a man or an elephant. Half-truth. And the government has been saying this half-truth on many issues, beating around the bush on many important issues, not addressing the critical question. We are talking about farmers here. Now, just the other day, there was this question in Parliament by BJP MP Dola Sen, whether you can meet the target of doubling farmers' income by 2022 with this current rate of growth. And if you can't, what kind of growth do you need to achieve that target? So instead of saying whether the government can meet that target or not, the answer comes, we have launched 17 schemes and made interventions at different points for the benefit of farmers, with a caveat that it's the state governments which will be implementing these schemes and programs for the farmers. So the center is not committing itself to doubling the farmers' income by 2022. Nobody is actually cornering the government. Government could have simply said, well, given the COVID situation, given the state of the economy, probably we will have to extend this deadline. The government is not saying that. Now, in another question, there was this question by Trinamool Congress MP. Question was whether India's bilateral relationships with neighbors like Nepal, China, Bangladesh, have our relations deteriorated? External Affairs Ministry says in Parliament in its reply, no. Now this is ridiculous. That was after Defence Minister Rajnath Singh had spoken at length about our problems with China. The government is saying emphatically no. Our relations with China is as good as it was. And opposition is silent. So this opposition is doing everything for the sake of politics. If it was serious about cornering the government on real strong policy issues, it could have. But what to say about an opposition whose leader, like Rahul Gandhi, is in Washington tweeting about farmers in India?
We'll take last few questions. another question that we've got is, what's your analysis on the suspension of MPs because of the chaos in the House during the voting of this bill, and has the opposition been united in some way over this farm bill issue? The fact that they remained scattered and at least they found one voice.
Yes, to an extent, but it's a very temporary phase. If you recall, in the election of the deputy of the Rajya Sabha deputy chairperson,
Right.
Harivansh Narayan, who is in the news now, the opposition had fielded this candidate Manoj Kumar Jha,
Marjidi.
and when it came to voting, the opposition backed off, and Harivansh Narayan was elected through voice vote, unopposed. Technically opposed, but he was elected through voice vote because Trinamool Congress said we will not go with the Congress in this election. Many other parties said that. So opposition is not united as such. Right now, actually, you have elections in West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, at many places. I mean, next year. Then you have Bihar. So opposition thinks that they have probably got some opening somewhere to actually target the government on farmers issue, and they can probably convince the farmers that the government is anti-farmer. So this is a very opportunistic alliance, which is quite temporary, I would say. It will collapse as soon as the session gets over. I mean, that's what I think.
And you have to answer with what's your analysis on the suspension of the MPs, the last question.
Suspension, look, I think it was not unjustified, in the sense you cannot behave the way you did. And you cannot be throwing papers at the deputy chairpersons. You cannot be snatching the mic or trying to uproot it. But then, having said that, I would qualify it that their demand for a voice vote or for a division of vote should have been accepted, because the government had clear numbers. So let's have voting and let's see who stands where. So both sides are at fault here.
Thank you so much for this. Do follow us. We will keep you updated with all the latest developments from the Parliament and otherwise. And do follow our YouTube channel.
Thank you.